snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RockyTopInsider.com, joined by our staff writer here at RTI, Ben McKee, and he's also the producer and co-host of the Swain Event morning radio show that you can hear from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern every single day on Swain's free app and on Swain Event TV on Periscope and Facebook Live. We appreciate you tuning in to another episode here of the podcast. Ben, we have a lot to cover, so I'll kind of keep the intro stuff here really short. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube is the way a lot of people listen to the podcast. We appreciate that. If you haven't subscribed yet, you should. And RockyTopInsider.com is the website. You can click on the podcast tab on the homepage there, and you can listen to it straight from that webpage or download it from there as well. Well, Ben, we know where Tennessee is going to go bowling. It was initially looking like it was going to be the Music City Bowl, and then that changed. I actually have an article up on RockyTopInsider.com talking about quotes from Philip Fulmer kind of detailing a little bit. He didn't go too in depth about how all that played out. We talked a little bit about going into the Gator Bowl and kind of changing a little bit from the Music City Bowl to the Gator Bowl. But Tennessee will be playing in Jacksonville for a Florida Bowl game on January 2nd, and they'll be playing the Indiana Hoosiers. Ben, let's talk a little bit about the Hoosiers. I'm planning on getting at least one beat writer, if not a couple, of people who cover Indiana on for social interview podcasts and things like that to discuss the Hoosiers and get more of a actual firsthand knowledge of Indiana. But just from looking at what I did for the 5 things to know about Tennessee's bowl opponent piece that's on the website right now, again, that's RockyTopInsider.com. I don't think Indiana is as good as you might expect. I do think their story is really good. They have not had, up until this season, they had not had a winning season in football back until 2007. That was their last winning season, was 2007. They had not had a 500. They had not finished above 500 in Big Ten play since 1993. They go from back-to-back 5-7 seasons. They'd had a couple 6-7 seasons, finishing 6-6 in I think both 2015 and 2016. But they lost their bowl games in those 2 seasons, so they finished 6-7. But this is going from 6-7 to back-to-back 5-7 seasons to 8-4 this year. That's their most wins again since that 1993 season where they went 8-4 as well. It's only the 3rd time since the mid to late 80s that Indiana has finished with 8 wins in a season in football. So the turnaround they've done this year, on paper, it looks really good. And, I definitely give them credit. That is a very impressive turnaround no matter who you're playing. If you can go from back-to-back 5-7 seasons to 8-4 and finishing 5-4 in the Big Ten, that's impressive. But when you dig a little bit deeper, I think, to me, this Indiana team is, I would say, kind of the polar opposite of UAB, where this year, a lot of people were worried about UAB, well, for one, because Tennessee had lost to Georgia State in this season, so that you couldn't take anybody for granted, and I'm definitely not going to take Indiana for granted. But UAB had a really, statistically, a really, really good defense, one of the best defenses in the country on paper. But then when you looked at who they had played a bunch of just really bad teams. They didn't have a really good win. I think almost all of their wins had come against teams that had, at that point, 3 or fewer wins in the season. That's actually the same thing with Indiana. If you look at their schedule, they played 4 teams that finished 6-6 or better this season and lost all 4 of them. Michigan State ended up finishing 6-6. They lost to them 40-31. They got blown up by Ohio State. They got blown up by Michigan, and they did give Penn State a good game. I will say that they gave Penn State a run for their money, but Penn State ultimately won that game. So of all the bowl eligible teams that Indiana played, they were 0-4 against. Every other team they played that they beat were 5-7 and worse. Their best victory probably is a 5-7 Nebraska team that, definitely underachieved, underperformed this year for what people were expecting of them. They also beat a 5-7 Ball State team, and they finished the season with a double overtime victory against a 4-8 Purdue squad. They have really good offense, but like I said, that's on paper. And you look at who they've kind of done what they've done against. It gives you a little pause, but they have a pretty good offense, and I think that offense could give Tennessee some troubles because I think their quarterback, who's actually had to fill in for Michael Penix Jr., who is a one-time Tennessee commit, who is now out for the season, unfortunately. But their backup quarterback, whose first name is Peyton, struggling to remember his last name, I'll look it up here really quickly. It is Peyton Ramsey. He has actually had a pretty good season. 13 touchdowns, only 4 picks. He's thrown for over 2,000 yards and 69.2% completion percentage. He also has run for about 200 yards and 6 scores on 80 carries. So he doesn't, he's not a burner, but he can definitely pick up some yards while on the ground. Defense is not so good, pretty suspect, especially, like I said, considering the teams they've played. They're in the bottom half of the Big Ten in most defensive categories. I think one of the few things they're not in the bottom half is like third down defense, but they're otherwise in the bottom half of the Big Ten in scoring defense, rushing defense, passing defense, total sacks, red zone defense, and turnovers forced. Ben, maybe I am off base on this one, but I'm just, I think it's, they beat who they're supposed to, and it's Indiana football, so they probably lost to who they're supposed to. Maybe Michigan State, you can argue they maybe should have beat them, but I think that's maybe more a toss-up considering how bad Michigan State ended up being this year. But I'm just not very impressed with the Hoosiers. Maybe, once you and I talk a little bit here, maybe once I talk to someone who covers the Hoosiers, I'll have my mind changed, but my initial impressions when I did the live reaction show was that I think Tennessee should win this game and maybe handily even, but I think Tennessee should definitely win this game. And then you see the Vegas line come out that it's a toss-up or a pick-em, and I'm just confused. I'm just not very impressed with Indiana, and I'm curious your thoughts on them.
Yeah, and that's because they don't have the elite athletes that just scare you or just make you want to go out of your way to watch Indiana football. Indiana football may have a great player, and when I say great player, I'm referring to a Joe Burrow type player. They may have that type of player every 5-10 years, somewhere in there, but they only have 1, maybe 2 at the most. They never have a team full, such as a Ohio State, or just to try and think of some teams that Tennessee could have potentially played in the bowl game, a Minnesota, who has several NFL wide receivers, or Michigan, who we know has a ton of talent. Indiana doesn't have those type of players, but they have a good football team, a good, solid football team. They're just a middle-of-the-road Big Ten team, and I guess a middle-of-the-road Big Ten team is better than every other conference. Maybe not the SEC, but it's most definitely better than the ACC and the Pac-12 and the Big 12. And there are some teams in the SEC, like a South Carolina, a Mississippi State, and Ole Miss, that Indiana is a better overall team than. It's just that they don't have those players that just stick out, that you hear about all season long. Even a team like Purdue, which is another middle-of-the-road Big Ten team, they have Rondale Moore, so you have an awareness of him, and it kind of makes you want to go out of your way to watch him play, even though he plays for Purdue, and nobody's really turning on the TV on Saturday to watch Purdue football. But Rondale Moore is the type of player that will make you do just that. And Shaviska Shenault, the wide receiver at Colorado, who's probably a first-round pick, he is the type of player that, okay, sure, you're not watching Colorado football on a Saturday, but you are tuning in to watch him just because of how exciting of a football player he is. So Indiana doesn't have any of those type players on its team, which is why I think the matchup is kind of lackluster from an intriguing standpoint for fans, because quite frankly, they just don't have that player that you just are dying to watch, because the Indiana football brand is not great. And Swain joked to me this morning, he said that he mentioned it on the locker room, but he thought it was funny that, 2 basketball schools were linking up in a bowl game. And he was joking about Tennessee being a basketball school, But he was right about the Indiana side of things. Indiana has a solid football program, but we all know what Indiana is known for. Yeah. It's their basketball. So I think that's why the matchup is kind of boring. I mean, even I would rather play Louisville, and I mentioned Louisville because Tennessee was reportedly, according to Brett McMurphy, was on the verge of playing Louisville in the Music City Bowl, and we all know that kind of got switched up at the last second. But I think Louisville was a more intriguing matchup, and it's just boring. It's a boring matchup because of history, but fans are allowed to think like that, but the team cannot. I mean, plain and simple, Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt, they've learned their lesson about what will happen when they don't take a team seriously. We saw that week 1 against Georgia State, and then week 2, I thought they took BYU seriously, but they just did not execute. And Swain made this good point on the show this morning that few teams have had better first quarter success in terms of scoring points than Indiana. And you already don't have Juwan Jennings for the first half. A month off of football, you have to be ready to go from the get-go, because although Indiana is kind of a middle-of-the-road Big Ten team, they're one of the country's best at scoring points in the first half. And you go back and you look at Tennessee's games this year, really UTC and Georgia are the only games that Tennessee has gotten out to a quick start. So Tennessee is going to have to be ready from the get-go. But Indiana does not scare me as a Tennessee fan. It's kind of a boring matchup on paper. It may turn into a great game, but at least personnel-wise, it is a boring game on paper.
They do have, I will say, they have some excitement to them. Like I said, I do think their quarterback, I think it would have been obviously a lot more interesting had Michael Penix Jr. been healthy for this game, because that would have been a really cool storyline to see. I don't think it's happened with Tennessee that I can think of recently where, we talk about all these guys that Tennessee could have had and how that could have impacted, they look like a Trevor Lawrence, look at a T. Higgins, but Tennessee hasn't faced those guys, in an actual game. This would be one of the few times where Tennessee has had to face a player that would have been, I guess Cade Mays is one you can look at it at Georgia, but he's not, he doesn't get the attention because he's not a quarterback or a big-time running back or receiver. This would have been interesting because it would have been, what could have happened if Tennessee had kept Michael Penix in the class when they did, because he'd had a pretty good redshirt freshman year. He played, I think, 3 games last season, redshirted for Indiana, and then he came out and started this year for him and was actually doing pretty good. And then he had a couple injuries early on in the season, and then unfortunately suffered the season-ending injury after their win over Nebraska, or I think in their win over Northwestern, on November 2nd. But Peyton Ramsey is pretty good. Like I said, he's thrown for over 300 yards in 3 of his last 5 games. Over his last 3 games, all starts, he's totaled 919 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. And those were in those last 3 games. Purdue, obviously not very good, but those were against Penn State and Michigan as well, where he put up some good numbers. So I mean, he was doing it against some of the better teams in the Big Ten as well. You mentioned not having some of the dynamic athletes, and I agree. They don't have. I think Big Ten speed, unless you're in Ohio State, for the most part, unless you're in Ohio State, Big Ten doesn't have the same type of athletes, the same type of speed that an SEC team schools does. And Tennessee isn't a prototypical SEC team, not yet, at least. They have good talent, but they don't have, they're still not competing with the Floridas, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the LSUs when it comes to the type of athletes that, Tennessee wants to have on the roster. But I do think Indiana has some interesting guys. You have Stevie Scott, Stevie Scott to me seems like the typical Big Ten big running back. He's 6'2", 231. He has 845 yards and 10 touchdowns on 178 carries, so right under 4.8 yards per carry or something like that. That just screams to me, I'm a Big Ten running back, or kind of a typical Big Ten running back. He's not the kid at Wisconsin, obviously, who's just a monster. But he just seems like a typical Big Ten running back. He's got 1,000 yards of offense because he also has 27 catches for 211 yards. But I will say, Indiana's receivers, I'd say they scare me a little bit. That's kind of the one matchup I really want to watch. Tennessee's defense, it'll be how good of a pass rush can they get against Peyton Ramsey, and how much does he do on the ground, running around and stuff. Because I think Indiana's receivers are very interesting to me. 5'11", 180-pound Whop Filler, I think they say his last name. Interesting name. But he has 69 catches for 1,001 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then Indiana has 3 other pass catchers with 500 receiving yards on the season. Their tight end, Peyton Hendershot, who I think, Ben, is going to be a matchup problem for Tennessee at 6'4", 255 pounds, has 46 catches, 555 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Ty Freifrogel, which is the perfect Big Ten receiver name, 42 receptions, 541 yards, and 3 scores. And then Nick Westbrook, 38 receptions, 524 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So and those two guys are both 6'2" and 6'3". So you've got some big tall receivers. A tight end who has done a lot of damage this year at Hendershot with 46 catches, 555 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And like I said, 6'4", 255. That's going to be the most intriguing matchup for me. And that's, talk about kind of a lack of star power. I do think that's where Indiana has some athletic ability and some star power is in their pass catching core there. That's going to be the biggest thing to me. But I was pretty surprised that this game opened up as a pick'em. Because I think Tennessee should, I don't expect Vegas to put them as like a 10-point favorite or anything like that, but I think Tennessee should be at least a 2-3 point favorite on a neutral field. I get that these two teams maybe look a little similar. I think you and Swain talked about that a little bit this morning on the Swain event. He said that these two teams are a little similar on paper and kind of look at what they've done and how they've gotten here and everything. I guess maybe it's my orange-colored glasses, my Tennessee bias. I just think Tennessee is a better team. You look at who Tennessee's beaten. They've at least beaten some bowl-eligible teams. They've at least beaten teams with winning records on this season. I think 4 of Tennessee's 6 victories over FBS teams this year have come against teams who qualified for a bowl game. Missouri qualified; they're not going to play, but they qualified for a bowl game. So did Kentucky, and so did Mississippi State, and I'm blanking on who the other one is now. UAB. So 4 of Tennessee's 6 FBS victories this year came against teams that at least qualified for a bowl. They may not be participating in one, but they qualified for one at least. And Tennessee, I think, as we're recording this, Ben, you and I both commented on the tweet from Brett McMurphy that talked about Tennessee was one of a handful of 6 or 7 schools this year in a 12-game regular season, played 9 teams that made it to, got bowl eligibility this year. So 9 of Tennessee's 12 opponents got bowl eligibility. The only 3 that didn't for Tennessee were Chattanooga, which is an FCS school, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt. So I just think Tennessee, even just on paper and a cursory glance between the two teams, I think they're a better team than Indiana. Were you surprised at all to see that this game opened up as no line, but it opened up as a toss-up?
Yes, I am, because although the teams are similar on paper, I think Tennessee is a better football team. Tennessee has more athleticism, has more talent. I would take Tennessee's coaches over Indiana's coaches in a heartbeat. So I think Tennessee should absolutely be a favorite in this football game. And ultimately, I do think that they will end up being the favorite in this football game once people start to bet and place their pick for this game. Tennessee has more athleticism, quite frankly, and that does not mean that Tennessee, the athleticism is going to be the only reason that Tennessee wins the football game. Tennessee has to show up and execute, and Indiana is not going to be a pushover. They've had a successful year for a reason. The Gator Bowl wanted Indiana for a reason, but I'm sorry, their receivers are not going to be as good as Tennessee's receivers.
No.
I think Tennessee has the better quarterback in this matchup. I think Tennessee has the better offensive line. Like you, I have just not been blown away by Indiana this season. And again, Indiana's a good football team. They're not a pushover, but I do think Tennessee's better. As I really start to dive in and watch Indiana over the next week or so, going back and watching the games, but watching from afar this season, tuning in every now and then, and just kind of keeping up with what they do each Saturday. And now, within the last 18 hours or so, or 18 to 24 hours, diving in and kind of looking at their personnel and whatnot. They're not a team that scares me. They have some young corners that I think Marquez Callaway and Josh Palmer are going to be able to take advantage of. Tennessee's corners do worry me.
Yeah.
Just because I don't have a ton of faith in Tennessee's corners outside of Bryce Thompson. My faith has gotten stronger in Alontae Taylor here in the last couple of games. I think he's improved after a miserable start to the season. But outside of Bryce Thompson and outside of Alontae Taylor, Tennessee doesn't really have a corner that I trust. Maybe Sean Schamberger at the nickel position. He's playing decent football, but he's good for a bonehead mistake every now and then. Obviously, I trust Nigel Warrior. He is playing tremendous football. Jalen McCullough's name hasn't been called really since the South Carolina game, and I think that's a good thing because the safety position can be one of those positions to where if the announcers are talking about you during the game, that's because you blew your assignment or you missed the tackle. So I almost think it's a good thing that Jalen McCullough hasn't been talked about a ton over the month of November, but he's been out there playing solid football. And again, I have not seen him just make a tremendous mistake like he did on the opening play of the South Carolina game that allowed South Carolina that 75-yard touchdown on the very first play of the game. So this is a matchup to me that Tennessee should absolutely win. And to be honest with you, it should be around a double-digit win. I'm not calling for a 20 to 30-point win or whatnot, but there's no reason, in my opinion, that Tennessee should not win by 7 to 10 points, maybe 12 points. It's just on paper that they are more athletic, they have a better team, they have better depth, they have better coaching. And again, I'm going to really dive in and really start watching them over these next couple of days, so maybe that opinion will change. But as of now, looking at things on paper and my opinion of them before it was announced that Tennessee would play them in the bowl game, I was surprised when they came out with the betting lines, and it was a pick'em game. And maybe I'm flat out wrong because, as we know, Vegas is rich for a reason.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to go back just a second here about some storylines, I just remembered a tweet you sent out. I think it might have been Sunday night. It might have been sometime on Mondays or before we recorded this podcast, but we were so close to another intriguing storyline, and that would have been Tennessee going up against Mike DeBoard. But he is no longer at Indiana, as you mentioned, Ben. I think is he in the XFL now? Where is he coaching at now?
He was in the AAF with the San Diego Fleet, but that league no longer exists. So as far as I know, he's not coaching football right now.
Well, we're just missing out on a Mike DeBoard Tennessee rematch, or I guess matchup. We're just missing out on a Tennessee Michael Penix Jr. matchup. So this bowl game, actually, this matchup could have been really intriguing a year ago. I guess although Penix would have been playing in the game, but still, this could have been a much more intriguing matchup a year ago. But unfortunately, Tennessee did not make a bowl game. Actually, Indiana didn't make a bowl game last year either. So neither team made it to a bowl game, and then this year we're a year late on a couple of those. But we'll obviously have a ton of coverage for you about Tennessee's TaxSlayer Bowl matchup with Indiana in the coming weeks. That'll be on January 2nd, and that'll be on ESPN at 7 o'clock Eastern time at night. And Ben, that's actually one thing we haven't talked about, talking about comparing the Music City Bowl to the TaxSlayer Bowl and all this different stuff. I talked about on Twitter how, I thought the Music City Bowl was a more prestigious bowl. How it is now, it's gotten a lot more prestigious. You look at some of the matchups that have been in that bowl over the last few years. Just kind of how Nashville itself has grown up and become a pretty big city, honestly, in the sports world at this point, with the Titans and the Predators, and with the NFL draft going there, and how big that stage was for them. And I think the actual bowl payout, the amount of money Tennessee would have kept from the bowl game, would have been higher in the Music City Bowl too. But I do think there is a big plus of playing in the TaxSlayer over the Music City. And that is all eyes will be on Tennessee when they play in this game, because that's the only bowl game that's on when Tennessee's playing. When the Music City Bowl on December 30th, I believe, was that day when that bowl game is. You had, I think, at least 2, if not 3 other bowl games happening that day. So you have little things spread out. It's right before New Year's, so you got a lot of probably traveling and plans going on for a lot of people. It's on a Monday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. People were working and stuff then too. I saw a lot of people kind of complaining about that. Plus side, it was in Nashville, so it was easier to travel to than Jacksonville. But for all the people who will be staying home to watch this game, it'll be a lot easier to watch because it's on at night. So even if you're working, most people will be off at that point. It'll be the only game on at that point. So I think from a perspective from there of watchability and eyes being on Tennessee, it is a lot better than the Music City Bowl. So I think there are pluses and minuses to both. But I think ultimately, this is where Tennessee wanted to go. This definitely, I think, where Philip Fulmer and this group of the coaches and players, I think it's where they wanted to go too. So I'm glad they got to go there. I'm happy for the players, happy for the team that they were able to go to a different bowl game, because other than I guess maybe Juwan Jennings and I guess Ryan Lovingood, I think the only bowl game any of the guys on this roster had been to, if they'd been to a bowl game at Tennessee, was the Music City Bowl. So I think also getting him to a different bowl venue was maybe a priority too. So maybe we'll have to have Matt Jones on the podcast, Ben, and talk with him about how all that played out with Kentucky, because he was none too happy on Twitter about it. I'm just kidding. I never plan to have Matt Jones on this podcast if I could ever help it. But Ben, let's talk about some more SEC football stuff here, not just specifically with Tennessee. The SEC over the weekends, and I guess it was all over the weekend. I don't think anything happened Monday, but all over the weekend, we have new blood in the SEC after an offseason for the first time in years where there were no head coaching changes in the conference. We've had 3 this offseason. I'm a little surprised we haven't seen a 4th or maybe a 5th happen maybe at Vanderbilt or South Carolina or anything like that. But we saw 3 head coaches get axed, and we've seen 3 new guys come in. One of them is a familiar, actually I guess technically 2 of them are familiar names, but one of them has never been a head coach before in the SEC. Lane Kiffin to Ole Miss, that's the big headliner obviously. Sam Pittman to Arkansas, the Georgia offensive line coach, and also coached offensive line at Tennessee for a year. He's been at Arkansas before. He's been all over the SEC, it feels like. And then Eli Drinkwitz, the OC from NC State, who coached at Appalachian State for a season, took them to a 12-1 record this year. He is the head coach over at Missouri. So 3 new coaches at 3 schools that Tennessee will be playing all in the next couple years. Obviously, Tennessee plays Missouri every year. Tennessee will be playing Arkansas this next upcoming season in 2020. And then in 2021, Tennessee will be playing Ole Miss. So all 3 schools will be on Tennessee's schedule within the next couple seasons. Ben, you had an interesting take on this Swain event. I want you to explain yourself here on the podcast too. You have an interesting take on who you think is the best hire of those 3. Most people, I think the vast majority of people, would say they believe it is Lane Kiffin as the best hire of these group, but that's not what you think. That's not necessarily your opinion on this matter. So I want you to kind of explain why you think it's not Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, and I like all 3 hires for each school, considering the school's circumstances. But quite frankly, I just do not trust Lane Kiffin off the football field. I think from a football standpoint, I think he was the absolute best hire out of the 3 schools that made coaching changes: Ole Miss, Missouri, and Arkansas. I think without a doubt, X's and O's, Lane Kiffin takes the cake. I mean, he is tremendous. Watching John Reese Plumlee, Jerrion Ely, their running back, and a lot of that young talent that Ole Miss has on its roster, I think it is going to be so much fun to watch them play in Lane Kiffin's system, and will present a lot of problems for the SEC West this year. And then assuming that Plumlee is still there as a junior in 2021 when Tennessee plays Ole Miss, that will not be a fun matchup for Jeremy Pruitt and Tennessee. But the reason I think that, honestly, I think Sam Pittman and let me restart. I don't necessarily think that the hire is better at Arkansas or better than Missouri, because, again, the X's and O's kind of trump everything, and Lane Kiffin will be able to recruit. And the players absolutely love Lane Kiffin. His players absolutely love him. You go back and you talk to guys like Jonathan Crompton and Montario Hardesty, guys that played for Kiffin in his lone season at Tennessee. They absolutely love Lane Kiffin and playing for him. So, again, from an X's and O's and, players loving to play for him and being able to recruit, I do think Ole Miss had the best hire, but ultimately I don't know that Lane Kiffin will have the best tenure because I don't trust Lane Kiffin. Essentially, I think that Lane Kiffin has the most potential, but I don't want to buy any stock. I don't want to touch Lane Kiffin with a 10-foot pole just because I don't trust him. I want a football coach who is a CEO in today's day and age of college football. I want a head coach that fixes problems. College football coaches have to deal with so many stupid things throughout the football season. Calls about their players late in the night, as we saw about Jeremy Banks, all because of a ticket, a traffic violation that wasn't taken care of. Just stupid things like that just you don't have to deal with at the NFL level. There are so many little fires that pop up throughout the course of the calendar year in college football that it's why, say what you will about Urban Meyer, but it's why he's such a great college coach. It's why Bob Stoops was so great. It's why Nick Saban is so great. It's why Coach O has been so great this year, is that they manage those fires and they put those fires out before they expand from house fires to forest fires. And I don't trust Lane Kiffin to do that. So because of that, I do think that, again, Ole Miss made the best hire possible for its school, best name, best recruiter, best X's and O's wise. But I just don't trust Lane Kiffin, aside from the calling plays and getting his players all fired up. Ole Miss will play. I know literally not every single one of their games is on a Saturday, but let's pretend that they are. There's 12 Saturdays a year guaranteed in which Ole Miss will play football. It's what's the math on that? 352 other days throughout the year that I don't trust Lane Kiffin. So that is kind of why I think that Sam Pittman at Arkansas, I love that hire. For similar reasons that I love the Lane Kiffin hire, in the sense of I think that Sam Pittman will be able to recruit well in the SEC because he knows the SEC. I think Sam Pittman, because he knows the SEC so well and has been at Arkansas, has been at Georgia, has been at Tennessee, has so many great ties in recruiting, ties in terms of being able to hire a coaching staff. He's an exciting creature, a colorful guy. I think he'll be able to really get the players to buy into him. We've seen it everywhere he goes. His offensive linemen at Georgia, at Arkansas, at Tennessee absolutely love Sam Pittman. So I don't think Pittman will win the SEC West at Arkansas by any means, but I do think he will have relative success considering the circumstances in the West. And Eli Drinkwitz, they're going from App State to Missouri. He's such a brilliant offensive mind, and his resume is a little shorter than the other two because he's younger than Sam Pittman, and although he's probably around the same age as Kiffin, Kiffin has been doing it a lot longer experience-wise in terms of head coaching gigs. So don't really know what to expect from Eli Drinkwitz just because he was only at App State for 1 year, but I do know he is a great offensive mind, and am interested to see how he heads up a program. But that is why I think that ultimately I don't know that Kiffin will work out. He may prove me wrong. It's just I don't trust him away from the football field right now.
I think that you can't discount how much a coach loves a university, or how much they have a fit. Because you look at with Ed Orgeron, a lot of people question whether or not he could be a successful head coach and all this different stuff because he hadn't had a great tenure as a head coach previously, different stops and all this different stuff. But he is the most perfect fit at LSU I think you could ever conceive of. Just from personality, from just how he is and how he recruits and how he relates to players. I think Sam Pittman in that regard, I don't think you can discount that. I think Sam Pittman is a perfect fit for Arkansas in that regard, from a personality standpoint, from how much he likes the university because he coached there for several years. I think he does really enjoyed his time at Arkansas. I think he really wanted to go back there, and I think it's the right move for him, absolutely. I just don't know that I don't know that it's going to work out. To me, my biggest issue with this is that he has never even been an offensive coordinator, or just a coordinator in general. I guess he's been a recruiting coordinator, and he's been an associate head coach. But he's not ever even commanded one side of the football. He's commanded one group. He's never been even an OC. And I get it. There have been other coaches who you look at. I guess what was Gus Malzahn an example, or Dabo Swinney? I mean, he was a guy that I think Dabo never was a coordinator and ended up getting promoted to head coach. I'm pulling up his bio here really quick. Yeah, he was a wide receivers coach at Alabama, wide receivers coach at Clemson, associate head coach, wide receivers coach at Clemson, and then was interim head coach. And I guess he was, I think he was actually the OC for 1 year, or at least the interim head coach and an OC for 1 year at at Clemson in 2008. But that was just kind of that one season and in that one interim kind of role, and then he got promoted to actual full-time head coach. So it doesn't happen often, and obviously not every single time that it happens. You're going to have a Dabo Swinney situation where he's going to have just unparalleled success and go win national titles and everything like that. That's my biggest question mark with Sam Pittman is he ready to be a head coach? And I know that maybe sounds contradictory from someone who covers Tennessee football, where you have Jeremy Pruitt, who had never been a head coach before, but at least he'd been a successful defensive coordinator at high-profile schools. Pittman's never been an OC anywhere. He's never been a head coach anywhere. He can work out, that's for sure. I definitely think he can work out, but he also has to deal with a mess of this roster that is just a bunch of, I hate to reference them like this, but just a bunch of misfit toys is what I guess just a way to describe that roster, because it's a half Brett Bielema, half Chad Morris roster that doesn't have an identity on either side of the ball. I think Pittman's got a long road ahead of him. I think you talked about it I think you mentioned it here too, but I think you talked about on Swain's show that Arkansas's got to have a lot of patience with him. They cannot expect Sam Pittman to get things going there in the first couple years. He's probably got I'd say from a pure roster perspective, he might have a tougher rebuild than what Jeremy Pruitt had when he first got here. Because at least Pruitt had guys who the data and raw talent was there. I don't know how much actual raw talent and cohesive fit that those guys have there. Because when Pruitt took over, at least they were all consistently Butch Jones guys that Butch Jones have, and his staffs have brought in and recruited. There wasn't like not even just two totally polar opposite types of offenses. With Brett Bielema and Chad Morris, those are two just distinctly different types of offenses and philosophies that now Pittman's going to go in there and figure out what to do with. So I think he's a good hire. I still think, to me, Lane Kiffin is the best one of the three hires right now, because we've seen Ole Miss before have success. Obviously they cheated to do it with Hugh Freeze, but we've seen before have success in recruiting that in Ole Miss. We've seen them before have success being a thorn in Alabama's side. At best, I don't ever think Ole Miss is going to be competing for national titles or anything like that. But I think Lane Kiffin is I think you're not giving him enough credit as kind of how he's changed off the field. And who knows? I don't know. Maybe I'm giving him too much credit. We don't know him as a person. I don't know him, what he does off the field a whole lot. I don't know how much he really truly has changed. Maybe he hasn't changed a whole lot. It's hard sometimes to change a great deal, and Kiffin needed a change, especially if he's going to be a head coach again at the Power 5 program. He needed to change a lot about himself from how he was at Tennessee and how he was at USC. And I think he's learned a lot from his time as an OC at Alabama, from his time as a head coach at FAU. He had a lot of success at FAU, which that was actually took them to, I think, unparalleled heights in their young football program. But that's a whole different animal in the SEC, and he's going to be facing. He doesn't have the easiest road ahead of him, facing Alabama every year, facing LSU every year, facing Auburn every year. It's not going to be easy. But he also has the benefit of, it's not like Ole Miss when they let go of Matt Luke. They didn't do it because they'd gone 2-10, 3-9, 4-8 in back-to-back years. They actually, they were okay. They struggled, but there's talent there. Him and Rice Plumlee, they're the young quarterback at Ole Miss. They're going to have a lot of fun next season. And that offense, it's defensively, I wonder about them. But I just think if Kiffin has grown enough to not make mistakes off the field, to cheat, because everybody cheats in college football. If you're listening to this and don't think so, you're naive. All coaches cheat in college football. Even Dabo Swinney, the guy who pretends like he doesn't do anything wrong. All coaches cheat. It's just a matter of how well you do it, how well you hide it. If he's gotten better at hiding things and not being as blatant about it, then he'll have success. And I'm with you on some of that too, Ben. How much has he changed as a person? Some of the things he's done off the field. He was, I think Sway mentioned it on the Swain event too. He wasn't single last time he was in the SEC. Or last time he's been a head coach in general of a Power 5 program. He is now, and he's going to Ole Miss, where they are known for having attractive women at the Grove down at Ole Miss. So that's going to be such an interesting situation to monitor. I think that one has the highest ceiling of all of the hires. But unfortunately for Ole Miss, I also think it could potentially have the lowest floor because, as you mentioned, when things have gone wrong with Lane Kiffin, they've tended to explode and just kind of go downhill quickly. So I think all three are interesting. I don't know that all three really hurt Tennessee in recruiting or anything like that. I think Kiffin could down the road just because of where Ole Miss is and that recruiting Memphis will be tougher. But I think that that the only way these hires hurt is who they go hire away, and does Lane Kiffin or does Sam Pittman, because I don't think Eli Drinkwitz will, but will Kiffin or Pittman, try to poach some people off of Tennessee staff? Like I don't think T. Martin would leave. I definitely don't think Jim Chaney will leave. But what about David Johnson? I don't think Brian Niedermeyer would leave. But what about, you could go down the list and looking at some guys on Tennessee's coaching staff. I don't know, Ben. I that would be the one thing that would concern me immediately. Maybe down the road, obviously, I think Kiffin will cause some issues for Tennessee in recruiting. But I do wonder if we see one of these coaches try and come in and steal away one or two of Tennessee's coaches off their staff.
Yeah, I think the only one to be worried about, though, is David Johnson, because I think, Brian Niedermeyer, Jim Chaney, Ansley, T. Martin, those are the guys, and David Johnson are the guys that you don't want to lose. Like the most definite guys you do not want to lose. All the other guys, they're replaceable, and it's probably already in the works that some of those guys are going to be on their way out the door. So I don't think Jim Chaney is going to go to Arkansas. I think that would be, quite frankly, a stupid decision on his end. T. Martin, I mean, why go to Ole Miss? I don't think that's an upgrade. I realize that T and Lane Kiffin are boys, but T going to Ole Miss is not a step up from what he is doing right now at Tennessee. Derek Ansley, I don't know of any tie-ins to Lane Kiffin or Sam Pittman. And again, he's the defensive coordinator at Tennessee. Being the defensive coordinator at Arkansas and being the defensive coordinator at Ole Miss would be a step down. So I would be surprised if any of those three left. The one that I would be worried about is David Johnson and going to Florida State to join Mike Norvell's staff. Coached wide receivers under Mike Norvell there at Memphis. Has great recruiting ties to the city of Memphis that would really help David Johnson. And even David Johnson has those ties to Louisiana, and Florida State is closer to Louisiana than Knoxville is. And it would not surprise me if Mike Norvell comes calling for David Johnson. I saw today where Auburn offensive coordinator Kenny Dillingham, Mike Norvell hired him to be his offensive coordinator at Florida State, and somebody made the joke on Twitter that after all these past couple of seasons of Mike Norvell's coaches being, plucked away from him, now he's going back and plucking the coaches that left Memphis to go elsewhere for better jobs. Now he's plucking those coaches to come to Florida State, and David Johnson could be one of those guys. But that would be something to keep an eye out for. So, but other than that, if a coach leaves to go to Ole Miss or Arkansas, I think it would be a situation to where it wasn't necessarily the end of the world that they're leaving, and that Tennessee didn't do everything they could to bring them back. If a coach wanted to leave to go to Ole Miss, to go to Arkansas, I imagine, even Missouri, I imagine if Jeremy Pruitt really wanted him to be on staff, he would do everything that he could to keep that coach on staff. So I would be very surprised if Tennessee has any coaching departures to those two schools. Tennessee is going to have coaching change, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But as of right now, it's not going to be any of the big name coaching staff members.
Yeah, I agree with you. There would definitely be coaching changes on the staff. We don't want to sit here and speculate on guys' jobs, but there definitely going to be a couple. Like you said, maybe one like David Johnson who moves on to a job on his own accord. But I definitely think Pruitt will make a couple of changes because recruiting hasn't been awful by any means, but there have been some spots where you can definitely say, hey, it needs to get better here. And Pruitt, that's one thing he will not stand for, is recruiting not being at the level that he thinks it should be. And obviously he cares a lot about on-field coaching and developing guys as well. But it always helps to get more naturally talented guys in there and try to develop them rather than taking a bunch of guys who maybe don't have the natural talent and trying to develop them and everything. So Pruitt will not stand for recruiting not going how he wants it to. So I agree with you, Ben. From everything we both have heard, there will be changes. And like I said, there could definitely be changes of guys leaving on their own accord, not being forced out or whatever you want to say, fired or whatever. But there's definitely going to be a couple guys who are on staff right now who will not be at the beginning of next season. And who knows when that happens. That'll probably happen at least at the earliest. It would probably be after the early signing period's over. I think maybe kind of early January. But even then, I think it might not be until after February, because Tennessee's still going to have a lot of guys on their board after the early signing period that haven't committed, and that they're still going to be targeting for National Signing Day in February. So I don't know that you'll, at the earliest, I think it'd be late December, early January, after the bowl game. Not long after the bowl game is when you might see it happen, or maybe right before it. But it might not be until February when you do see it happen. But we'll go ahead and end that podcast here. Ben, we're going to have a lot of stuff this week we're going to be covering at RockyTopInsider.com, not just bowl stuff for football and recruiting stuff for football as well, because the early signing period is rapidly approaching on December 18th. But Tennessee and Memphis in men's basketball, it's officially a top 20 matchup. The AP poll came out on Monday. Tennessee moved up to number 19. Memphis is number 13, even though I don't know why Memphis moved up. They looked pretty bad against UAB, a kind of mediocre team, and almost they very easily could have lost that game. They didn't, obviously. But anyway, it'll be a top 20 matchup when Tennessee and Memphis take the court on Saturday, December 14th in Thompson Bowling Arena. That is going to be a fun atmosphere. We're going to have all kinds of coverage on that as well, and we'll, our next podcast, talk a lot about that. We'll probably still talk about some football stuff too, but we're definitely going to talk about the Tennessee-Memphis men's basketball game for the second podcast this week. But for right now, we'll go ahead and end this podcast here. Hope you all enjoyed it. If it's your first time listening, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We really appreciate it, and we hope you'll join us for next time. Signing off for Ben McKee, I am Nathaniel Rutherford, and this has been another episode of the RTI Podcast.